So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, esteemed guests and colleagues, to the Global Survivors Fund side event to the Supporting the Future of Syria and the Region Conference. My name is Maya Shah. I am the Director of Operations of the Global Survivors Fund. The fund was founded in 2019 by two Nobel Peace Prize laureates, Dr. Denis Mukwege and Ms. Nadia Murad. And our mission is to enhance access to reparation for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. I'm going to start with a couple of housekeeping rules first. So first, we do have interpretation in Arabic and English, and you should have the headsets and online. Can I ask those in the room to put their phones on silent, please? We will have a Q&A session about 3/4 of the way through. Those in the room, you have a microphone in front of you. Those online, please put your questions in the chat, and please put your name and the organization that you're from. We do only have an hour, so we will be very strict on the timekeeping, and my colleague Ruth there will be raising for the panelists in particular a 1-minute sign when we're coming up to time. So with that, it is my honor and pleasure to invite you to this event today in person and online. We do have a number of guests online, and in particular, we have survivors joining us from Turkey and Syria, and we're very grateful to them for being here with us today. Unfortunately, Minister Caroline Genèse is ill and so cannot make the event today. She sends her apologies, but her Chief of Staff, Head of Cabinet, will be joining us a bit later on today. So with that, I'd like to set the scene a bit for today's discussion. I think we all know that arbitrary detention is a tool that is instrumentalized by the Syrian regime to silence large parts of the Syrian population, but even before 2011. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry has documented significant numbers of sexual violence cases in government detention facilities. Women, men, and children as young as 11. We know that this has continued, and studies done by our partners have seen an increase of cases of sexual violence in the conflict. It is not limited to detention. It is done in house raids, in ground operations, and at checkpoints. And we also saw a proliferation of cases of sexual violence linked to ISIS and Daesh and other non-state armed actors, including rape, sexual torture, abduction, sexual slavery, forced marriage, and forced pregnancies. This has resulted in large parts of the population suffering psychological, physical harms, stigmatization, economic and educational loss, and broken family and community connections. I think we can all say that the lists of harms are endless, and which is why it is so important for reparation. So important to address and repair some of these harms. But we all know, I think, that reparation by the perpetrators, state or other duty bearers in Syria, remain at best elusive and most likely non-existent. However, equally, survivors' lives go on, and their needs are urgent. So it is now imperative for the international community to step in and step up. Survivors have rights and needs that must be met, from rehabilitation, accountability, and memorialization. And so today, that is what we want to explore, on how the international community can do just that. And with that, I would like to introduce you to the panel. I'd like to first introduce you to Tarek Matamawi, and apologies if I didn't say your surname right, Tarek. You are the project manager of the Interim Reparative Measures Project. Tarek, hello.
Hello all. Thank you, Maya.
For the Interim Reparative Measures Project. So we call them interim reparative measures because they are not reparation in the legal sense of the term, but they look and they feel like reparation. And you are doing this project together with the Global Survivors Fund and the Association of Detainees and the Missing of Sednaya Prison, ADMSP, and the Center for Victims of Torture, CVT. Tarek was active in the 2011 peaceful uprising in Syria against the Assad regime, and after surviving the Daria massacre in 2012, you continued your pursuit for democracy, which has led to 6-month detention in a regime prison in 2013. Following release, Tarek sought refuge in Turkey with his family, where he now dedicates his time to advocating for democracy and human rights. And I'm so sorry, Tarek, that you couldn't be with us today for lack of having a visa. I now would like to introduce Monsieur Robert Petit, who's the head of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria, also known as the IIIM. Mr. Petit has 35 years of criminal justice experience, and since 2017, he led the UN follow-on mechanism on the Democratic Republic of Congo in relation to the murders of 2 members of the group of experts. Mr. Petit has also served as senior counselor in the Crimes Against Humanity and the War Crimes section of Justice of Canada, and has held a number of international prosecutorial positions, including for Cambodia, Sierra Leone, and East Timor. And I'd like to introduce Ms. Leila Baker, who's the Regional Director for Arab States of the UNFPA, the UN Agency for Sexual and Reproductive Health. Ms. Baker has 30 years international experience in global humanitarian and development settings, primarily in the Arab region, and has led leadership roles with UNDP, UNRWA, UNDCO, the National Branch of the IFRC in Palestine, and International Planned Parenthood Federation and Oxfam, UK. I'd love to thank all the panelists for joining us today, and I have terribly forgotten Miss Sama. We are just so honored to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Sama, you yourself are a survivor, and you're going to tell us about your time, I think.
Yes.
And we really are truly honored to have you in the room with us today.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn the first question to Leila. So Leila, UNFPA has an annual report on the gender-based violence. Have I made a mistake? I'm so sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I'm a little bit, I have to say, I'm a little bit thrown because the head of cabinet was supposed to give the keynote and the opening, and then we were supposed to follow. So I'm terribly sorry. I've introduced the panel, so we will turn to Sama. Sama, I would love you to tell us of your time in detention. I don't think a lot of people here online need any introduction to you. You're an esteemed Syrian actor, an activist, a humanitarian, and your voice is well known to Syrian survivors. We are so thankful that you're here today, so I will leave the floor to you, please, to set us off.
My damn memory has betrayed me plenty of time, and it still does. But when it comes to that voice, it refuses to let me down. Samar, get up. They took Sarah. Sarah's father was released after 14 years of detention at Hafez al-Assad's dungeon, and a year later, he was left with a baby girl, Sarah. When Sarah turned 14, she too was detained. In late February 2014, at the infamous Adra prison in Damascus, known as the Financial Crimes Wing, most prisoners there had been accused of theft, no matter if the stolen goods amounted to a single item or a whole country. The dormitory door opened and in came a pale, thin young girl with fairly long hair. She went to sit in the corner. Before locking the door, the female warden who had brought her in asked, "Are you Sarah al-Alaw?" She answered yes. In that moment, my memory broke through the prison walls, taking me back to the day I saw her giving a confession on Syrian television. A large caption at the bottom of the screen read, "The terrorist Sarah Khaled al-Alaw, leader of Jabhat al-Nusra in Al-Bukamal." Yes, I remembered her, remembered how sorry I had felt for her, and the intense hatred I had for a regime that would arrest a child. She had been born in 1994, only a few years older than my own daughter. 5 months to the day I saw Sarah on television, I was arrested for my aid work, transporting medicine to areas under siege. And then one day in 2014, I met her. I was being remanded in custody by the de facto counterterrorism court that the regime had established following the revolution outbreak. I was meant to be sent to the fourth wing in Adra prison, the woman terrorist wing, as we called it, and we would be detained there indefinitely. However, because of the number of women awaiting trial in the counterterrorism court, prison management decided to move some of us to the financial crimes wing, where there was more space. This in itself was a major punishment. We couldn't stand being in a place covered in pictures of Mr. President with women who worshipped him and glowered at us as national traitors. I tried talking to Sarah. I knew how odd it was to be in such a place, crowded and full of women. Yet, one would feel so lonely and isolated. It happened to us all on our first day. But those women who tried to support new women detained there made it easier for us. This is what I wanted to do for Sarah, but she didn't seem to be in a talking mood. I left to give her space and went to bed. As the day passed, I sensed that she needed to speak to someone. She walked over and we started talking. We endlessly discussed the revolution and the things we had done to send to this wretched place. But we never regretted them. The revolution was and still is an unfading dream to all us. Although I was curious, I didn't want to ask about that interview, the confession she had to make, or the hijab that she hadn't been wearing yet at the time of our conversation. I didn't want to ask either if she really was a leader of Jabhat al-Nusra and the other, confession she had been forced to do on television. I wanted her to choose to tell me everything when she felt ready to do it. So we would often stay up when the other prisoners were asleep at night. Eventually, she told me everything she had been subjected to by the intelligence services how they had deceived her, claiming that if she had appeared on television and read out the confession statement they had written, then she could return to her mother's and father's loving embrace. It was a common strategy utilized by the Syrian regime to trick many detainees, men and women, into making taped false confessions. Many women like her had been deceived into filming an interview, and others received the numerous threats instead, such as their parents or children being arrested by the intelligence services too. And they recorded confessions. When Sarah appeared before the military field court, she was brimming with love and life and hope, despite the endless torture, the countless unjust accusations. Despite it all, Sarah never ceased to inspire patience within me and hope that tomorrow would be better, that we would get out and see our revolution through to the end. We became very close over time. She became like a daughter to me, and she saw her mother in me. As the day went by, the good and the bad, we soldiered through several misadventures together with a few other women. And we even managed to report violations of our rights to Colonel Annan Suleiman, the prison superintendent. And so in December 2015, Zaran Halouch died. We watched the news from the prison television. The next day, if I recall well, an order came to move Sarah to another wing and to give her no bed or locker. I learned why from Ali, one of the officers responsible for our wing. And so I found out, Ali said that after the news about Zarhan Alush, another another news was spread because another warden had overheard Sarah say, "God bless his soul." I flew into rage. Sarah had never said that. I knew I was sharing a dormitory with her. But who would ever believe one terrorist defending another? What can we do? I asked Ali. As usual, what we could do was make a deal with Colonel Adnan, a certain amount of money in exchange for returning Sarah to our wing. And so the deal was made, but the amount was so large that the other women and I barely managed to pay it, even with Sarah's uncle helping by slipping her money during his regular visits. Living in Damascus, it was hardly difficult for him, unlike her elderly parents who lived in Deir ez-Zor in northeast Syria. I remember how shocked I was when, during visiting hours, I saw an elderly man pushing his wife in a wheelchair who was clutching a watermelon on her lap because Sarah loved watermelon. How had he been able to walk all the way to the women's prison? In any case, we gave the money to Colonel Adnan, and he and Sarah moved, but not in the way we had wanted. He moved her to another wing. In Adra prison was a place called the Nadwa, a canteen. It had been set up by a female prisoner sentenced to life and murder. Colonel Adnan had allowed that in exchange for a monthly commission, on top of a startup kickback for this canteen. For us terrorists, the Nadwa was an escape. We could invite women from other wings and spend time together. So the Nadwa became the place where I met Sarah and our other friends who shared our dream of revolution. We shared other ideas too, like our small plot to improve prison conditions. We met almost daily until June 2016, when I awoke to a scream from inside the dormitory. "Samara, Get up, they're taking Sarah. I jumped up like I was possessed. As son, one of the officers was there. I asked him if it was true. He nodded. I tried to find out more, but he wouldn't answer me. We were being watched, of course. I waited for her to walk past the iron bars. When she did, her face was sickly, her eyes wandering. She didn't know what to do. I managed to hug her through the bars and she whispered, "Tell my uncle." And then Sarah disappeared. Disappeared. I went back into the dormitory, stunned. No, I would say thunderstruck. So many questions gnawed at me. Had that really happened, or was I still asleep? Where had they taken her? Where would she go? How could I pass the news to her uncle when we were being watched all the time? Even our phone calls were under surveillance. I had thousands of questions in my head. I waited for Ali. Perhaps she would have answered to the thousands of questions racing through my mind. Colonel Adnan arrived. At the very moment I left my dormitory to see her, as if he wanted me to hear what he would say. Turning to Ali, he, mockingly spiteful, ordered, "Divide Sarah's inheritance." There was a wide grin on his face. A while later, one of the prisoners was taken to an interrogation room. When she returned, she told me what the interrogator had said. Sarah's being executed. I signed it off. Oh dear God, it's all easy for those words to leave their mouths. Had she really been executed? Just like that, without a trial or a lawyer to defend her? To this day, I refuse. My mind, my heart, my soul refuse to accept that Sarah is not with us any longer. Will I see you again, my little girl, my dear friend? I still have so much to tell you about our disappointments, our revolution, our lost dreams, and our children's unknown future. Who knows? Perhaps you're the one waiting for me to come to you. Sarah al-Alaw isn't the only one to have been forcibly disappeared, taken without a trial. The fates of countless men and women remain unknown, and so we wait for the day when there will be justice. Thank you very much.
Sama, thank you for your really powerful words. I think you've given us just a tiny glimpse of the torment, but I think it's so important what you've just done for the truth-telling, for the freedom of expression, and for what you said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing with us today. We've now been joined by Mr. Owen van der Put, who is the head of cabinet. Sorry, I was looking at my colleague Ruth over there and didn't realize he's taken. Sorry, apologies. Head of Cabinet to the Belgian Minister of Development and Cooperation, and you're here today to join us. Thank you so much for stepping in, as I know Minister Janez is not well today, so thank you for joining us. And I will give the floor to you to give the keynote address.
Thank you very much, first of all, to the Global Survivors Fund for the invitation. Of course, extend also a warm welcome to all of you here in Brussels. So first of all, like was said, I must extend our apologies for the absence of our minister, Caroline Genet. Unfortunately, she has lost her voice, literally. She will remain, of course, vocal about these issues and about the Syrian conflict. Mostly likely due to the combination of intense campaigning, because we have a lot of elections on the 9th of June, and the demanding responsibilities of being minister, of course. And secondly, apologies from a personal side for being late. We had a meeting with the Palestinian Prime Minister, and I couldn't walk away, of course. The Gaza war is, of course, not a forgotten crisis. It's at the top of the news cycle. Yeah, and we are also a very structural partner of the PA and for humanitarian aid in Gaza and West Bank. So it was also an important meeting. So apologies again for being late, but I had a good reason, I think. So as we are impressed and inspired by the work of the Global Survivors Fund, there were already a lot of contacts and meetings and events with our minister. We could not miss this opportunity to highlight their work, but also to highlight the so-called forgotten crisis in Syria. And forgotten, I say that because more than 13 years ago, the conflict in Syria started, and all these years later, Syrians are still suffering, but the attention is also wavering. In recent months, Syria has been experiencing a wave of violence not seen since 2020, and it remains one of the largest humanitarian crises globally and the largest displacement crisis. So as a Minister for Humanitarian Aid and for development cooperation, we of course have to be involved in this crisis and want to keep the spotlight on this crisis. Because as you all know, millions of Syrians are displaced, violence is everywhere, both inside and outside of the country. So the humanitarian needs, they continue to increase, even after 13 years of war. But we try to do as much as possible, and one of the things by which we try to contribute is to keep it high on our own political agenda, and secondly, on the European agenda, and thirdly, on a more global scale. So we are therefore happy that Belgium will participate in the Brussels Aid Conference later today. It will stress our determination again to contribute to alleviate the grave humanitarian situation in the country and around the country, and then to the violence and, most importantly, probably the push for political negotiations. But that's probably the most tricky, most difficult part also. So I am proud to announce that Belgium will pledge later today 28.5 million euros of support for Syrians, both in the country as in the region. However, like I said, it's only through sustainable political solutions and when accountability also for the crimes committed is ensured that Syrians will be able one day to turn the dark pages of this terrible war, or will be able to start turning those pages, those dark pages. We must say that all around the world, we are witnessing a lack of protection of civilians in conflict and impunity. I think it has never been higher. It has, I think, also never been more televised, certainly when we're talking then about Gaza and specifically less televised and in the media in Syria, but that's of course an injustice. So there is an urgent need to reestablish the respect for international humanitarian law and to put protection central in our humanitarian efforts. And more specifically, and also the reason why we're here now, the conflict-related sexual violence is a clear example of those crimes committed against civilians, innocent people. It is an issue that we are witnessing all around the world. We see it every day, from the DRC to Gaza to Ukraine, but surely also in Syria. Sexual violence has been committed on a large scale by the Syrian regime, several non-state armed groups and terrorist organizations. Therefore, it should remain and will remain on our political and humanitarian agenda. Survivors of these vile crimes are women, men, girls, boys, including members of the LGBTQI+ community, and of all ages and in nearly all regions inside Syria. They want to speak up about the violations, to address it and hold the perpetrators accountable. However, what is needed then, it doesn't go automatically. They need a system to protect them that gives them hope for reparation, that gives them hope also for a future. We, as a state, as a government, we need to listen to them and develop projects and solutions together with these survivors. But most of all, in our view, and I think we all share this, survivors are rights holders. They know best what they want, and they know what they need when it comes to repairing the harm they suffered. First of all, it's recognizing the harm that has been done to survivor, that is important. And secondly, working on a sense of justice, which can, of course, then make a real difference. We as Belgium, we have supported the Global Survivors Fund since 4 years, since 2020, and witnessed the powerful impact of their action all around the globe. And I'm proud to say that we increased our support to the Global Survivors Fund in 24 and 25 with a contribution of €2 million. So Global Survivors Fund stays a very important partner for us. By promoting this contextualized survivor-centered approach, offering reparations in conflict or post-conflict situation, they managed to empower survivors to regain their dignity, not least, and to become role models or
interpreters to Arabic, please, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Therefore, of course, a broad network of partners like survivors groups, civil society organizations, aides, UN representatives, and experts is essential. And to scale up efforts and innovative initiatives like reparations in an effective and a collaborative way, this is most important. So again, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the news, when we listen to the radio, when we look on our smartphone, we are every day confronted with the most horrible images, videos, pictures in Palestine, Ukraine, but they overshadow the many forgotten crises, as I said, in, for example, DRC, Yemen, Sudan, and Syria. The humanitarian situation in Syria and in the neighboring countries stays deeply worrying. We should not lose sight of them. That's the consistent message that we put to the table where we can, because sadly, as we see, out of sight means also out of money. And that's also why we're here today in Brussels for the conference, to not let this forgotten crisis not get out of money, which is probably the most important issue today. So, because without proper funding, and we have seen this the last couple of years when we were in charge here as a cabinet, as a minister, the humanitarian actors, our partners on the ground, they cannot provide the most basic needs even for civilians, leaving them in extremely vulnerable situations and resorting to survival sex, for example, which all abuses and vile things that come with them. So my main message is, or our main message is today, that Belgium continues to stand in solidarity with the civilians, the innocent people of Syria, to push for a political solution and keep the light of as much actors as possible on this crisis. The Syrian people, they have been suffering way, way too much for way too long. It should stop. We're trying to push. We try to find the partners for that. But in the meantime, we are happy to work with our esteemed partners like the Global Survivors Fund to alleviate the dire situation as much as we can. There's no magical solution for now, but like it said, together we can at least put in our best efforts and keep pushing for the solution. Voilà. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erwin, and on behalf of Minister Jeunesse for joining us today. I think that was a really powerful articulation of the role of the international community must play, responding to survivors. And I'm so happy you mentioned in a survivor-centered way, which is crucial and important. It's fantastic that Belgium is so actively supporting, and also thank you for your support to the Global Survivors Fund. Immensely grateful for that. But I think for supporting for accountability and beyond, and for putting the spotlight on Syria, and I think you being here today, demonstrates the priority of Belgium, but I hope that other states will also follow to this end. So thank you so much for being with us today. I have introduced the panel, as I was so sorry, I was a bit out of order, but I have introduced the panel, so I am going to move now to our first panelist. Thank you so much. That's Leila for being here with us today. And as we said, that UNFPA has an annual report called The Voices from Syria, where you look at the main trends and the consequences of the violence and the coping strategies. So with that, please, could you just give us an overview of these trends and a summary of your most recent findings in 2023?
Thank you very much for having us as part of the panel and joining. My first words are those of sympathy to anyone who's been a victim and survivor of sexual violence and sharing their story. I think we often overlook that. So just a huge shout out of sympathy. You know, when we're asked to talk about the trends, it's 13 years that we've been doing this, and the report comes out annually. I wish that I could tell you that the trends have changed. They haven't. I wish that I could tell you that evidence alone is the key to finding a strategy for justice, but we know that evidence on its own isn't enough. And I think this is where the power of this publication that we put out, Voices, is very important. Evidence is often termed in numbers. How many survivors are they? Where are they? Can we validate them? We'll come back to that point later on and why our particular perspective is one case is one case too much. There should be zero tolerance, zero acceptance of sexual violence, and even more importantly, where it's perpetuated within the context of a conflict. I'm American, as you might have guessed from the accent, but I'm Palestinian in origin. So thank you also for your kind words about Palestine. But you asked me about the trends. And one of the most pervasive and one of the most insidious trends that I can tell you 13 years into the conflict and what the report highlights is that sexual violence and gender-based violence in general and violence overall is being normalized. We've seen it before, it's happening, we report on it. It gets attention for a limited amount of time, some money, and thank you to all of those who support not just UNFPA, but the entire partner alliances that we have in combating gender-based violence. But that's not enough. So I can give you, for example, that there are alarming reports, not just about that normalization, but how pervasive it is. On the one hand, we could say UNFPA and its partners is doing its job. We now have women's and girls' safe spaces across many of the places where gender-based violence has or continues to be perpetuated, and we have a mechanism of identifying it, a safe space where people can go, where they feel confident in the services, and where we can hopefully bring a little bit of sense of stability and renewal to the people who have been at the receiving end of that violence. I can continue to tell you that there are unlawful killings, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, all kinds of discrimination that continue. We document it, we present it in the report, one voice at a time. One voice at a time. Similar to our very eloquent speaker, Salma, thank you for sharing your story. But it's the story of one voice, and she, because most of our services are for women, although we recognize that gender-based violence is not only against women. It's her story. It's her perspective on what that has done to erode her social fabric, her dignity from the inside, because no one can rob you of your dignity. So I'm also an Arabic speaker, and it sounds very strange to rob someone of their dignity because that's preserved by being born as a human being. But it robs you of your ability for people to see you with that dignity, is how I would say it. And we heard about how the women and the men who were in the circles of someone who's a survivor of sexual violence, what that it does to her and how it erodes her world and makes it much more difficult to integrate. So we are concerned very much about the range of violence that continues, whether that's domestic or perpetrated within the community. We are very much worried about the conflation of factors that seem to be also increasing those trends, whether that's poverty, marginalization, and social exclusion as a result of the duration of the crisis. And though we can't untangle all of those, you asked about the trends. So we note the trends, we note what they're related to. And this goes back to the chef de cabinet's intervention. Until there is a political reconciliation that will bring about justice, and here I would add one tiny word. We always think of women as either the victims or survivor, depending on how you say that. At UNFPA, our programs are so women themselves return their own ability as agents of change. And they are the agent. They are their own agent, not someone else telling them. And so when we get to the part around reparation, choice is very important in this consideration. We as the international community come from a perspective of IHL. And I'll speak to that in the next section if we have time. But understanding that each woman and the Voices reports really teases that out. Every individual is just that. It's not a group of women, no matter what the numbers are. I am not the same woman as Maya is. And understanding how that voice and her voice can also carry into the peace process. The reparations not for her just individually, but collectively as a society, and how that gets knit into any of the political discussions is very important. We often talk about women, peace, and security, but this is fundamental and critical. And at UNFPA, we are trying, one, to strengthen the women's and girls' safe spaces so that we have more opportunity to engage, and hopefully link to the opportunities for women to look at those conflating factors. How do we open the door for better economic empowerment? How do we ensure that women and girls stay in school so that they don't have early marriage and they don't get married off for also transactional purposes, exploitative or none, or otherwise? And how do we bring those women back into the fold for the final peace negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry because we are running over time already. No, and it's just, but we just want to give the many survivors online the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to ask panelists to speak quickly, Robert. And then if we're all amenable, can we run over for 15 minutes to 3:15 close, if that's okay for everybody? But Leila, thank you so much. I think you highlighted so many points, important points about the choice, the individual choice, about the dignity that is there, that is always there, that is never taken away. And I think that leads very well into Tarek, who's next on our panel, to speak about the Interim Reparative Measures Project in Syria and about exactly that, about the survivor-centered way the project is done and the individual choice. So please, Tarek, the floor is yours. And while Tarek is speaking, there are going to be some pictures of the project that will be shown.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you all for having me here in this important event, actually, for Syrians, particularly for survivors and for families who still waited their beloved and facing all the time blackmail from multi-party claim that they have the destination of their beloved. Our project, as you know, it's comply with the policy of GSF. It's co-creation and will have survivor as partner, not beneficiaries. We try to put this into action by focus group discussion and interview, and they actually partake in the changes occurred to the project. We try to make a model, even though the organization which lead this model. I mean here, this reparative measures should be carried on by government, but unfortunately, and as the minister said, there is no political solution or transformation in horizon. Moreover, Assad regime denies the whole case of detainee and forcibly displaced. Anyway, the methodology of GSF put into action, survivors cooperate and partake in the project. Their needs started from political and human rights and judicial, but as I mentioned, we are not able, because it is beyond our capacity to achieve this. Other needs also, we face some critical situation, emergency need emerged from the earthquake, unprecedented earthquake hit the region of south of Turkey, which coincide with the location of IRM projects. Also, as refugee, you should have the legal document which identify your existence legally. This some challenges we have faced. Survivors ask also for sustain the project. They ask to reach to other area. For example, we have the high percent of Syrians reside in Istanbul. Also, a good percent there of survivors need to support. Most important, if we talk about survivor in out Assad regime control, also they are in dire need to this type of projects. The transformation go through many passes. Most important one, the psychosocial and medical, of course, and after that, livelihood. We have more than 35% of survivors are they're old 30 up to 40 years. They are in charge of their families. We have also third of female survivors lead their families. So they need also to expand our portfolio services. We get some good feedback from many survivors as we completed the individual IRM. By the way, also the project flew in logic way because we started with the individual IRM, so they improve their individual situation, either financially or other type of services. And the second one come to the collective. They also ask to partake effectively in the advocacy to support the cause of detainee people who still in behind bars. At least we have 125 Syrian behind bars, and many other the Assad regime denies their being in his detention center. I will put in the word of a female survivor, which sent us this feedback. This survivor, she is widow, used to have serious cardio condition and underwent to cardio surgery. She used to have a clothes store in Syria, but after fleeing to Turkey, she lost, of course, her job after also her detainees. She told us, starting my own clothing store brought me happiness and independence. I have achieved my dream of owning a business and no longer need to wash dishes in a restaurant because she faced this situation. She needs to work and no decent work available. So she worked in a local restaurant in washing dishes. Now my moral has improved and I can now provide for my son, meet my own needs and afford my treatment. That's one output of IRM for Syrians in Turkey. I think if we have opportunity to extend the project horizontally and vertically, we will go with a good model, and we also ask all entities, international and the key states has a ability to support Syrians from seized assets or from fine collected from entities which violate the sanitation against Assad regime and other governmental groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek, for giving us this overview and also showing the transformative impact of interim reparative measures. And we call them interim reparative measures because they're not reparation in the legal term, in the legal sense, but they look and feel like reparation, but obviously not provided by the duty bearers or those responsible. But it is ever more clear that the time for scaling up is now. And I think there I would like now to turn to Robert, because these interim reparative measures are complemented with broader justice and accountability. And given the importance of satisfaction as a key component of reparation, can you give us an introduction to the role of the IIIM and outline the possible ways in which survivors could see criminal accountability leading to possible judicial and court-awarded reparation? Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, but I also, as others, I would like to thank Salma for giving and keeping Sarah's voice alive, and through your testimony, your courageous testimony. Thank you. It does center what we're all here for and what we all do, and it's particularly, I'm particularly grateful to be able to meet Syrian society actors. This is one of our main accomplishment, I think, is the collaboration through the years that we've been able to establish with civil society actors, which is fundamentally important to our work, but also fundamentally important to our engagement and to future for Syria. And for those who are not familiar, and I'll try to be brief, with the International Independent and Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria, we were created by a General Assembly resolution in 2016 to assist in the investigation and prosecution of serious crimes committed in Syria since March 2011. We are the embodiment by the international community for the need for accountability for Syria, and we remain so, despite, as you've mentioned, Syria being somewhat of a forgotten crisis. We remain active and committed to accountability for Syria, and centered, and its survivors and victims are centered to our approach in everything that we do, because we recognize that they are ultimately the reason why accountability matters. I'm happy to say that despite all the obstacles, including the lack of resources, we are providing support to concrete accountability for crimes in Syria now. We have been able to help through requests for assistance from 16 different jurisdictions we have been able to help over 373 distinct requests for assistance, which represents 192 separate investigations that we have been able to help. This has led to, I know most of you know, some concrete results in different courts in Germany, in Norway, and last week in Paris, where 3 individuals from the security apparatus of the government were found guilty of crimes against humanity and war crimes for the death of 2 Syrian individuals. We contributed, the IIIM contributed to that investigation and prosecution, and we're very happy with the outcome. So additionally, we're looking at other ways in which we can provide accountability, because we do believe that the equation is peace and justice, not peace or justice. So we're looking for other ways to contribute, and as you know, Canada, I'm happy to say, and the Netherlands have brought to the International Court of Justice an action based on the Convention Against Torture for conditions at the detention centers of the government. And we are preparing and finalizing an extensive report on detention that has taken years to prepare and that we hope will be of assistance in that particular case. So we are continuing to try and provide support to these concrete justice outcomes, the only ones right now available for Syria and Syrian in national jurisdictions. And we are also preparing, hopefully, for future accountability outcome that we can also assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think we will come back to the future accountability in a bit. But I would like now to open the floor for questions because of our time constraint. And I think it's important that we get some questions in. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. Please say where you're from. And for those online, Ruth, my colleague, will be reading the online questions. So.
My name is Muataz, and I am the president of the Syrian House organization. So for these projects, for the survivors, I would like that you could take my recommendation. And my recommendation is for the Turkish government to cancel customs duties that concern the trade for projects carried out by Syrian survivors within the Turkish territory. And perhaps we should start a series of exhibitions or events in which the survivors could participate to have compensation, to find a way to present their creative work connected to the manufacturing work. You know, Syrian women are highly talented down to there. There are entire villages that produce carpets or other products. All these products can be sold in Turkey and in other Arab countries through exhibitions, and this could be a form of support to survivors. Another point, Syrian countries, you know, other countries, you know, could allow for Syrians to go out of their country even if they don't have a passport.
Stop you there because we have a number of questions, but thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ruth, do you have an online question, please?
Can you hear me? So the first question is from Media Al-Abdullah, a survivor of arrest and director of the Women's Organization for Transitional Justice. And she has mentioned that a French company called Lafarge had $687 million confiscated in the US for breach of sanctions and terrorist regimes in relation to complicity with ISIS. And she is wondering if that money could be moved to a survivors fund. So I don't know if any of our panelists would like to speak to that. We have a second question from Wissam Al-Zain. And Wissam says he would like to ask about the importance of reaching all survivors in northwest Syria and Turkey, but in particular about empowering survivors through projects aimed at building their capabilities and skills in proportion to their needs so that they can be more effective in society? So I think that might be an interesting question for Tyrek.
Thank you, Ruth. Tarek, yes, please, if you can answer question number 2 about the scaling up and the survivor-centered approach empowering survivors. And then actually I'm going to ask you, Ruth, to answer the question on Lafarge. Thank you. Tarek?
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Yes, the question about scaling up and about the survivor-centered approach.
Okay. We need to scale up the intervention of all entities in Syria and other bordering countries to support the survivors and families of forcibly arrested. They need the support because we are not able to transform their life without this type of support. If we are, as entities, able to redirect the assets seized by states related to either Assad regime or other groups, it will be good for sustainability and also good to make a difference, because sometimes the support is not enough to make the transformation in the life of survivors. We believe that if we transform the survivors regarding their education, for example, he will be able to pass the threshold of poverty, to break the cycle of poverty. And also, if we support people who have projects which need more than a small business budget, need a substantial amount, that will also help to put many survivors in this cycle of economy, because they will work each other to participate and cooperate to make the business succeed. Nowadays, we achieve many success stories with people, or especially or particularly women, who have small business projects. They work from home. They work in traditional manufacturing for food or processed food and other things. But for people who used to have their business, huge business in Syria, they need a different support. They need more money to launch and make their business go ahead and generate a profit.
Thank you so much. And I think that leads us to the question of financing these measures. Ruth, if you want to speak about the Lafarge.
Sure. Well, firstly, just to recognise Media's point, we are in agreement. We were part of a group of 55 CSOs led by the Truth and Justice Charter, asking the US to earmark those funds to an international fund. And I'm sure colleagues in the US are working on that, but we ask CSOs to keep engaging, because it's the survivors' voices and civil society voices that will make the difference in those discussions. So we ask you to keep engaged. Firstly, I think we need a broad agreement that a fund will be set up for victims. And for that to be established, we also need to look at repurposing of all assets, not only those in the US, but globally. There are funds in many countries which should be allocated to survivors of the regime. And secondly, I think for those parties to an international fund, there needs to be a look at both traditional and innovative financing mechanisms. So not just regular budgetary contributions, we need some innovation in this space so that survivors really have access to true, comprehensive and well-financed reparations. So I'll leave it at that, but just to really add to media's voice that we are fully in agreement. We are advocating and lobbying with fellow civil society organisations and are very keen to keep engaged on that.
Thank you, Ruth. I think we have one last question from the lady here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Anabia Farid Hassan. I will try to.
Well, I am a Syrian journalist. I would like to stress the importance. I mean, first of all, thank you for this session. Thank you to all of you for this session, because we are talking about the survivors in Syria. I was imprisoned in Syria after some interviews as a journalist that I carried out. But the important point is, I mean, for what I am concerned, is the fact that, I mean, the violence, sexual violence. We have had medical violence that had some consequences on, I had this myself on my genital system apparatus and on my ability of giving birth. I mean, I had no possibility to talk about these things. In Syria, my laptop was seized and they took me from a church. And in a European society, there are these forms of abuse. But in Syria, the situation is quite complicated. I found some of the pills that were given to me, and these pills were for limiting our ability to have a child, to have children. And so these forms of violence, medical violence, I would call it, were perpetrated on me and on other women in prison. I was a sports person, but afterward I found out that I had some problems connected to this medical treatment. And, you know, my, as Western society, we know very well that the situation is terrible. Some of my family members were able to make a request for family reunion. You know, some the pictures that they provided for this family reunion were me naked or me in a surgery room. You know, I suffered from all these violences. You know, I was withdrawn my journalist card, and then when I came to Europe, I asked for asylum, and my asylum request remained for 4 years without any outcome. And then in the end, I even was threatened, because I was told that if I was talking about all these things, I would have more problems for my asylum request. I would like to understand from you, of course, this is not an isolated case. It is not mine, the only case, for sure. This has occurred to many Syrian women, not only to me.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your situation, your story. I think it's extremely important, the point you bring up about breaking the silence, about being able to speak out, and about highlighting your situation and the different forms of violence against women. So thank you for sharing that and the abuse. Yeah. I think I'm going to unfortunately have to move the agenda along. So if I could, I'm so sorry, because I know we had some additional questions to both Leila and Ahmed as well, but I would maybe just ask if you would have any final remarks before I move to Sama to share with us. Would you like to just have any final words?
The more time I think we can give the Sama, the better.
Sure. We can give to someone and I'll have one last.
Why don't you go ahead, Linda? Yeah, and then we give.
I mean, it's very difficult to say last words. I think it's very clear that there is enough evidence, enough strength from the people who've been online, not to let this subject matter fall to the wayside. So you can count on UNFPA for sure to continue with our work, but we also look to everybody in the room to make for sure that it's not just a story that we tell, but actually to make it a convincing one so that hopefully in the next round, we can give you a better trends report and we can see not only that we talk about violence and the survivors, but actually how we've transitioned and allowed women to regain the control over their life through the peace and justice solutions. And you can count on UNFPA for us to continue our work on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you for that and for your support. Salma, please.
You have dreams and you think of building up a new life and you expect to turn into reality all your dreams and you think that everyone will help you. Your children, your family members do dream the day in which you will be set free from the prison. When you go out from prison, you have a shock because nothing has changed. After a time, you start hearing about the histories and stories about your family member having had some abuse, victim of violence due to your imprisonment. You think that you are the only person that needs support. And when you go out of prison, you find out that also them need support. Imagine those, who do not know, we do not know what destiny they had, what type of life are leading, what type of needs do they have, how much the support do they need for all the time. Even your family members, even if they are not in jail, they need support all the time.
Thank you, Sama. Thank you, I think, for highlighting that the effects go beyond just the individual and go to the family, to those all around. So thank you also for highlighting that. I think we can see that the need for reparation is clear and it's urgent. And I would like to call on the international community to act, to do something for survivors now, that will have a profound effect on their lives, and that together we can and we must transform the lives of survivors. There are ways, we've heard, I think, to set up and finance urgent interim reparative measures. We've talked about the repurposing of assets. We've talked about the wider justice and accountability. We've talked about looking at the trends, the setting up of an international fund that is sustainably financed. We have a lot of documentation through the efforts of both IIIM and UNFPA, but we need to think about how we can turn that documentation, translate it into a viable registration system, something like a victims registry, that can be a comprehensive documentation of the human rights violations that are being committed, and including in that conflict-related sexual violence as a specific category. I think this will be crucial to laying the foundation for future reparation, which we all hope will come to all survivors. So I want to thank you all for coming today. Thank you very much to the panelists, to Minister Janez's office for being here, but in particular, I want to thank the survivors, those of you who have shared your stories, who have highlighted the critical importance of us having these kinds of conversations and making sure that we can provide the urgent reparation that is needed. So thank you very much. We'll have a short video running now while we're sort of just collecting things that will play now.
Conflict-related sexual violence is a brutal, personal act of war and a grave violation of international law that can affect anyone. In many countries, rape and other forms of sexual violence are used on a large scale and often for military objectives. Official figures only scratch the surface. Survivors suffer a multitude of harms that go beyond deep physical and psychological trauma. They are displaced and they are blamed for what happened to them. Despite their right to a remedy and reparation to address such harms through financial compensation, healthcare, employment, education, and justice to rebuild their lives, a lack of funding often hinders the implementation of government-led reparation programs. Global Survivors Fund believes that these programs worldwide could be affordable through a combination of traditional and innovative pathways. Government budgets, targeted taxes on conflict-related industries or financial transactions, multilateral aid and loans, debt swap or cancellation, fines for breach of sanction or terrorist financing regimes. And what about the repurposing of perpetrators' assets? Imagine using the £2.5 billion from Chelsea's sale in 2022 for Ukraine's reparations. Just as the €90 million confiscated from al-Assad by France could benefit Syrian victims. States and the international community must utilize all available means to fund reparations, thereby alleviating the burden on the state, taxpayers, and donors. Reparations are not only possible, but also affordable, offering some hope for survivors.